How is everyone? Good conference so far? Excellent. Well, I appreciate everyone showing up, especially here towards the tail end of it. I think we've only got a couple more to go before it wraps up. But definitely appreciate everyone coming. So first question I'd have is, how many of you are currently deploying applications on AWS? Good number. Okay. So just a little bit of a level set here. I think somehow this got labeled under like the DevSecOps track. Is that right? We're not going to talk too much about DevSecOps here. The other thing is this isn't meant to be like a deep dive session. We've only got 45 minutes. So what I really want to do is just introduce you to some of the AWS development tools that you may or may not be using today. And what I would really love to do is dive into a demo. So we've got a demo of the tools, how they fit together, as well as some integration with, of course, Jenkins, since that's where we're at today. And then hopefully you will have some time for Q&A afterwards. But as a quick introduction, and there will be another question, I am the principal product manager for Elastic Beanstalk at AWS. Has anyone here used Elastic Beanstalk? Okay, so a fair number. Great. Well, let's just kind of jump right in. And I think what we'll look at covering here is a little bit about the challenges that we hear about. And as I talk to customers, both on the business side as well as on the development side, some of the feedback that I get. We'll talk a little bit about what some of the development tools are, again, at kind of a little bit of a higher level, what some of those capabilities, and then we'll dig into the demo behind those. So I would be curious if this resonates at all, but this is kind of a common scenario that I think we hear quite often is, you know, a business unit or the company will have a mandate to develop a new app or look at updating an existing app to respond to either customer needs or some sort of competitive pressure in the market. And there's always a list that comes with that. And it's the, you know, make sure to do list, right? And one of them is speed. Let's get it done like as soon as we possibly can. We're already behind, always behind. Deliver it at the lowest cost possible. Let's leverage existing tools. Let's leverage what we do today. Let's not put a lot in this, but yet we've got to get it done, again, very quickly. We also want to, especially on the updating, reduce risk. So how can we go about deploying and creating where we're eliminating as much downtime and customer impact as possible? Once we get it out there, or if it is an existing app, how can we continue to iterate very rapidly on that based on the feedback that we're getting? And then, by the way, it's got to adhere to all of the company's standards, all of the compliance practices, and it's got to be governed within kind of our current operations. And then if you have other things to do, you also have to keep those up and running at the same time. So lots of pressure, lots of challenges that this represents, but is this fairly common? Is there anything that's like glaringly missing from this in this scenario list? I'd love to hear about it. We'll add it. We'll add it on the fly here. Anything? Okay. So this is pretty common. We hear a lot about this. And so some of the challenges, especially from the business perspective, right, is, you know, how can we go about continuing to do this, but adopt a very systematic approach to the tools and the methods? And as the number of tools increases, as we continue to do this and we grow our development staff, there's a cost associated with that, right? And it's not only a cost of licensing, but it's a cost of training. As the number increases as well, it also creates, how do we maintain those? So how does our IT or operations, our licensing and contract group, how do we continue to manage that growing number of tools? And then the other thing that it starts to impact if you can't take that kind of systematic approach is language. And I think we heard this at the conference a couple times, is everybody has a different language, and it really impacts that knowledge sharing and collaboration across teams that are using different tool sets. So again, one of the challenges is just how can we go about kind of consolidating our tools and our development methodologies. How can we also go quicker as we do that? So as the number of runtimes increases, the support and security issues continue to increase as well. I've seen a lot of companies try to standardize on like single runtimes. Usually doesn't work very well, especially when you need to like address speed and customer needs. Some runtimes are better suited for certain purposes than others. So how can we manage that, but yet still allowing all of these to come together? And then with the limited resources and really our focus on getting these apps updated and staying competitive is how can we operate and manage this at scale? Especially with the dev and the ops coming together and the trust that's required there, how can we do that? And a lot of times it's difficult because there's a lack of dashboards, there's a lack of telemetry and metrics. How can we ensure that some of the best practices and our governance are built in by default? That's very, very difficult to do. And then how can we create really a fully managed scalability with continuous monitoring and managed updates? How can we offload some of that? So these are some of the challenges, definitely from a business perspective, that we hear about quite often. On the developer side, how can I go fast, right? So speed. How can I get up and running, and how can I do it without having to learn a lot about the underlying technology and resources? I know my code, I just want it to run somewhere where then I can do some testing. And when I'm doing that, how can I create a very continuous kind of delivery process, right? With testing, automated as much as possible. I also want to know detailed reporting. So if I am deploying my code onto an infrastructure and a runtime and something goes wrong, I want to know what went wrong and what I need to do specifically to change that and to make it work. I also need to be able to, again, back to the business challenge, I need to meet the needs of IT and operations. And then I need to try to eliminate as many manual processes as possible. So those are a lot of the challenges that we hear from developers as we're talking to them through conferences, through our forum, through reInvent, executive briefings. Very consistent feedback. So the tools that we've built out, and as part of AWS Development Tools, we really think about this as kind of how can we help developers and businesses create, release, and run. And we've got a set of services that really help do that. Now, as part of development tools, I did not include things like our AWS CLI. I didn't include things like our SDKs. I really wanted to focus on some of the services that help address and solve some of those challenges. And that really starts with things like Cloud9. We've also got a service called AWS Codestar, which is composed of multiple tools, and we'll get in and break that down a little bit. We've got AWS XRay, and then Elastic Beanstalk. Has everyone heard of all of these before? Yeah? Okay, so on the create side, that's really what Cloud9 is. Cloud9 is a full-featured IDE, code with just a browser, nothing to install on it, which also then brings in a sense of collaboration. Multiple people can collaborate in real time on the same code base. You can start with new projects very quickly. You really can build serverless applications with ease. And then through Cloud9, you've got direct terminal access to all your AWS services as well. So how many of you are using or have used Cloud9 for your development? Take a look at it. Give us some feedback as well. Go start up a project with it and play around. I think you'll be surprised how full-featured of an IDE it is, and the team is continuing to rapidly iterate on that themselves. So I want to talk a little bit about the release aspect of it as well. So when we think of release in kind of the software steps, we really think of, where is your source stored? And in fact, what we find is most companies are using multiple source code repositories. Once you've got your source, you either need to build or package, you need to be able to test, and you need to be able to deploy. And that, for us, is really where AWS Codestar comes in. So Codestar is a set of services that really help address these particular release steps and processes. And for instance, source, we've got AWS Code Commit. And we'll talk about each of these individually as we go as well. For build, we've got AWS CodeBuild. For testing, we've got AWS XRay that integrates, but we also open and rely upon a lot of third-party tooling to help with the testing in the release cycle as well. And then deploy, we've got our AWS CodeDeploy. Managed all by AWS Pipeline. So these are services that are available today and really help kind of package together and put the process and methodology behind the release stage. If we look at each one of these, AWS Code Commit, it's a fully managed Git service. It's actually built on top of S3 and DynamoDB. It provides data encryption at rest with customer KMS keys. Integrated directly with IAM as well, so you can set very granular permissions on your source repositories. And then everything is logged through CloudTrail, so you've got auditability, you've got auditing and durability behind that, so you can see exactly who's accessing it, what are they doing with it, and it's all stored in very standard CloudTrail logging. And then it's extensible through CloudWatch events as well, so you can actually take action based on commits and based on other activity within your source repo itself. CodeBuild is a fully managed build service, compiles source code, runs tests, produces software, scales continuously. So you can run parallel workloads in CodeBuild at the same time. You can provide your own custom build environments through Docker and CodeBuild, and we'll actually take a look at a demo where we're basically uploading some Ruby code that then is being put into a Docker image and deployed on AWS. And then you can launch it with Code Pipeline, Elastic Beanstalk, third-party tools such as Jenkins. There's also webhooks available, so you can connect it directly into a source repo if you'd like. As part of Codestar, we also have CodeDeploy, so really automates the deployments to any run type, whether that be something like ECS or EKS for us, whether it's a Docker, Kubernetes, whether it's running directly on an EC2 instance, or even deployed into Beanstalk for a fully managed experience that we'll talk about. Handles all the complexity of updating your applications, fully customizable, so you really can get in and tailor CodeDeploy to exactly what you need it to do. And then Code Pipeline is the pipeline that manages it. Continuous delivery service for really a reliable application update and deployment methodology. With Code Pipeline, you can deploy to various stages, so it follows a lot of best practices. It's a visual editor, very easy to set up, and again, integrates directly not only with AWS services, but a lot of third-party tooling as well. So another option in the release that I want to bring up that's very dear to my heart, of course, is Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Beanstalk leverages CodeDeploy to basically run your code on managed instances within AWS. And it really takes an opinionated kind of view of CodeDeploy. So we'll take some of the best practices and we'll build that in there, and that provides for things like deployment methodologies, including immutable, rolling with an additional batch, or you can do all at once. So it allows you the flexibility to kind of out of the box have a very safe deployment methodology, but yet allows you to tailor it to very unique environments, and super easy within Beanstalk, for instance, to set up blue-green through this type of deployment methodology. And then on the run side, that's really where Beanstalk starts to shine. It's the simplest way today to run your application on AWS. It's a managed service, fully automates and sets up all of the required infrastructure, including things like your load balancing, your auto scaling, health monitoring, real-time health monitoring and status. It does analysis and debugging, makes it very easy through integration with AWS XRay, and then pulls in all of your logging into a very kind of centralized application view. Supports multiple runtimes today, including Docker, but on the runtime side, .NET, PHP, Java, Tomcat, Go, Node, Python, Ruby. So those are just a few, but we're continuing to look at what customers are asking us for and managing and adding those runtimes as we go. A little bit about Beanstalk, and then we'll get into a demo. Is just some concepts that you'll see is Beanstalk, again, very, very easy to run an application in AWS, and that's really the main concepts behind it is an application. So you'll create an application and then deploy an environment behind it. And each environment and application is versioned as well. So not only will you have your source code versioning, but you'll actually have Beanstalk application versioning to let you do very easy things like roll back an entire application versus just a particular piece of code. The environments, you can break it up into, there's two types today. There's a web server environment and there's a worker environment or a worker tier. So if you need to offload some processing into some long-running tasks that maybe aren't a good fit for function or serverless, Beanstalk has a dedicated worker tier that you can do SQS monitoring and processing around. You can deploy either through a single instance, so if you're just doing a rapid development test, you can use Beanstalk to basically spin up a single instance and deploy your code on. Or you can do it in a high availability mode. So we've got large enterprise customers running fleets with hundreds of instances behind them, all being managed by Beanstalk. And then once you deploy to Beanstalk, basically you get a URL output behind it. So we generate a unique URL through Route 53, but you can bring your own custom domain as well. So you can easily put your URL in front of any Beanstalk application. You could enable SSL, very easy to do. And again, gives you the flexibility of doing different deployment methodologies. So an application version we kind of talked about. Every deployment that you do has its own unique application version. These are stored directly in an S3 that's part of your account. And I think that's a good differentiation to call out as well is Elastic Beanstalk will provision and deploy all of the resources that run your application in your AWS account. So you've got full control over those. They're your resources that's running your code. There isn't anything that's shared. There's no shared infrastructure behind that. You could go in and look at those resources. You could touch those. You could modify those through things that are called EB extensions that we provide. But they are your resources. Which then allows you to easily roll back to your basically application version on those resources at any time. And then a little bit about XRay. Again, XRay is a fairly new service. I think 2 years now. 2 years XRay has been out, but it's a very simple way to help you analyze and debug distributed applications. Basically, in the XRay service map, you can identify performance bottlenecks in near real time. Helps you basically identify any specific end user impact and experience due to the performance bottlenecks. And it works across both AWS as well as non-AWS resources. Okay, here's the fun part. Let's get into a demo, and let's go back to kind of that common scenario of developing a new app or updating an existing one, and how easy it is to do with some of the development tools that we just talked about. So again, real quick, we'll take a look at mainly some of the Codestar aspects of this and Beanstalk. So we'll really focus these demos in on kind of the two aspects of this. And a fair warning, I know there's been some really cool demo code that's here. I'm a product manager, so the demos that I'll show are super simple. They're websites, they're very easy a Go application and a Ruby application. But the point behind it is not necessarily what it is, but to show you how to deploy it on AWS. So we'll take the very first example that I want to show is just how quick it is. I'm a developer. I've got something running on my local IDE. I want now to be able to ship this up and basically deploy it on a running server in AWS. How can I do that? And with Elastic Beanstalk, just as that kind of test kind of service to use, you can do it really in 3 command lines. So it's that easy to get something up and running in AWS. And we'll take a look at that here. Can we switch over? Okay. Sorry about that. We're back. Actually, that will take longer than the demos, hopefully. So this is Elastic Beanstalk. This is the console here. And you can see we've only got one application that we set up. So this is an existing app, but I've got a new application. So I've developed a new Go application that basically is just going to render a HTML page. So what I can do is directly from within kind of my project, all I have to do is, if you think of the concepts within Elastic Beanstalk, it's really the 3 concepts. It is creating an application. So you saw we already had an existing one. We're going to create a new one. Then we're going to create an environment with that. And that will deploy our code. So we'll have a running application after that finishes. So let's go ahead and do that. And all we have to do is that's pretty small there. Can everyone see that? All right, so it's EB. It's the Elastic Beanstalk CLI. And the command is just EB. So what we want to do is EB init to basically create our environment. Now I could do that, just EB init by itself, and it's going to run me through basically an interactive mode. But I'm going to save some time because I know a couple of the command line options by there. But it will go through and ask you to select which region you want to deploy in, what type of load balancer you want to use to do that, and a few other aspects if you want to access it through SSH. I'm going to go ahead and just launch it with some options here. So I'm going to EB init. We're going to call this our Go app for our app, and then we're going to deploy it in US West 2, and we're going to set our platform to Go. This is actually all Elastic Beanstalk. Yep, so this is just, I'm a developer, and all I want to do is very quickly, if we go back to this part of the presentation, this is really what I'm doing here. So I've got a quick application. I've got it in my local IDE. I want to deploy it on AWS. How simple can I do that? And what we've done here is we've actually now created just through the EB init, we've created the application within Beanstalk itself. So now I want to go ahead and create the environment. So I can EB create, and let's call this our dev test. And so now this is creating basically a web tier environment within my Go application that we just created, and it's using a lot of the standard defaults. So it's using a lot of the opinions that we've learned over the years to safely deploy an application on AWS. And you'll see as this goes through, this is going through, if you recall in the one slide, it had the steps of creating all of the infrastructure, and that's what's happening right now. So without you having to know how to set up a security group, how to spin up an EC2 instance, how to create a load balancer and an auto-scaling group and an auto-scaling configuration, Elastic Beanstalk is doing that for you right now. And again, it's doing it as it's building these resources, it's putting them in your account. So you have full access to everything that this is creating within your account as well. So what questions do you have while this is going on here with Beanstalk? Any Everyone understand what's happening right now with the EB create command? Yeah, so Lambda is serverless, right? So Lambda is basically a way to deploy a function, which is very task or event oriented. Whereas this is actually deploying a web application for you. So it's creating the infrastructure, it's running it, in this case, on an EC2. It's building on that EC2 instance a Go runtime for you. It's creating the load balancing and the auto scaling groups. And so it's a long-standing web application versus a serverless function, which Lambda is. Now you could easily, for instance, instead of, if you recall, Elastic Beanstalk has a worker tier, for instance, where you can do task-oriented compute. You could actually use Lambda to process, let's say, SQS messages off of your web application and return results to it. So Elastic Beanstalk, this Go application could very easily integrate with a Lambda function to do kind of an overall processing and application or service. And I wanted to switch over to the Elastic Beanstalk console, but you can see that it's already created our Go app for us. So when we did the EB init and we gave it the name of Go app, it's actually created that in Beanstalk, and it's now going through the process. If we look at the environment, it'll show us that it's now up and running. So if we switch back over, we'll see that our deployment. So in a matter of, 2 or 3 minutes, we deployed a fully running application in AWS without having to know anything about how to basically provision services within AWS. And then I can simply open that up. And you can see that's basically now a web server with the Go runtime, with all the auto scaling, all the security groups configured, running in your account for you. Now, if I want to go back in and basically make a change, let's say I wanted to change the blue background to something different. Again, I don't have to know anything about AWS infrastructure to make a change like that. I'm working in my code. I'm going to save that, and then all I have to do is an EB deploy. So I want to deploy a new version of my test code that I've got running. And that now is going to go through using things like CodeDeploy kind of methodology to update that running application in my AWS account. And if we flip back over into the Beanstalk console, it happens fairly quick, but sometimes you can actually see it looks like it's already finished deploying. I can do EB open. And if I refresh my browser, you can see it basically just deployed the change we made. And now that within Beanstalk is also tracking each of these different application versions that we just deployed. So I could, without changing my source code on my local machine, I could actually roll back now to the previous change simply by setting a new application version. Very simple to do. So that's kind of the easiest use case, right? I've got something running on my local machine. I've tested it locally, but I want to see how it's running in an actual kind of production type environment. Very simple to do without having to learn a lot of, again, the underlying AWS services. Yes?
If you're building a Java app, let's say, which app server you like to use, Tomcat versus Jetty or some other?
Yeah, the question was, is if you're developing a Java app, do you have the ability to choose your application server? Today we support Tomcat, so you could actually deploy a runtime with Tomcat on it. If you wanted to use a different app server within Java, That's the only one we support, so you'd have to basically package that up into either a Docker image, for instance, and then deploy the image. That way you could maintain exactly what your runtime and app server versioning are. But yeah, today we support Tomcat. We support a few other app servers for some of the other languages. But again, those are things that as we get more feedback, we'll definitely look at building more app server platforms for us. Yes?
Going back to the comparison with Lambda, here you're creating the infrastructure on the EC2. There, in the serverless function, the infrastructure part is already there. You're just creating a task on top of it.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question was, is Lambda, Lambda basically is a serverless. All of the resources are already running. You're just you're basically deploying your code on a selected runtime on those serverless kind of resources. Those are all managed.
So as a comparison, if we don't know if it is surge in usage, the use case would be differentiated by where the application has surge in usage, you would rather go to Lambda, and when you know the projected capacity, you would go towards this one.
Yeah, again, the question I think is, when do I know what to use, right? Should I use Lambda? Should I use Beanstalk and deploy through a Codestar methodology? I think a lot of that is really use case specific. And maybe after the session, I'd love to hear more about that, and we could talk through that. But there's definitely an easy pass based on what it is you're trying to do on where the best kind of run environment is for you. So I know we're running out of time a little bit with a little bit of the monitoring, but I wanted to just kind of walk through two other use cases, and then actually I'll just kind of show the last one. So we'll skip over this one, but we looked at the Beanstalk. Well, what happens if I want more of a continuous delivery, right? What if I want to have more of a development methodology, something that can integrate into a DevOps process? So using things like Codestar combined with Elastic Beanstalk gives you that kind of development, that continuous delivery. And here's a pretty typical example of where somebody is using code commit as their source repository, again, a fully Git compatible source code repo. They're basically managing their continuous delivery through code pipeline. CodeBuild is doing the build behind it. And in this case, CodeBuild is creating a Docker image and it's storing it in the Amazon container registry. And then it's deploying it through Elastic Beanstalk into, again, a fully managed kind of application experience. One of the great strengths of AWS is a lot of these, it's not an all or nothing. We do provide that kind of end-to-end solution that we just looked at, but you can plug and play, so you can leverage your existing investments. So for instance, if I've already got a source code repo, if I've already got everything on Git, GitHub or Git Enterprise, you don't have to use code commit. You could actually use your current source code repository. Well, what happens if I've got Jenkins and I've got my pipelines established through Jenkins and that's what my team knows? That's great. You can also use Jenkins as your pipeline. You don't have to use Code Pipeline to do these. As a matter of fact, CodeBuild has a Jenkins plugin. So you can still use CodeBuild to do your Docker image build, store it in Amazon's container registry, and deploy it through Beanstalk. You could actually switch out the container registry if you were using Docker Hub instead. So very, very kind of granular in that it really fits into some of the investments you potentially have today, but helps kind of round those out into a fully managed kind of continuous delivery model. Yes, in the back.
So in this scenario here, would Jenkins just be running AWS CLI commands or ED CLI commands?
It wouldn't. And in fact, I can show you, it's going to run, and that's the demo. Let's actually take a look at that. That's a great question, is what is Jenkins running? And it's really going through the Jenkins pipeline calling CodeBuild. So Jenkins is monitoring your GitHub repo, noticing the changes, packaging things up, handing it off through the CodeBuild plugin, and then storing your Docker image into basically ECR and deploying on Beanstalk.
Is there a way to do that same workflow without AWS CodeBuild?
Without the CodeBuild plugin, you could. There'd be a little bit of engineering work to do there, and that's, again, where you would get into some of the API and potentially CLI work behind that. But why would you if basically you're just looking for a build service, and if it's already directly integrated and you could hand over a build spec file that has some of that in there, easy to do. I think we're going to see if we can sneak this in real quick here. So here's a project that I've got that's it's basically a Ruby application. Again, oh, all right, we're not dealing with this anymore. Trust me, it works. It's froze again. So yeah, I don't know what's happening with that there. Maybe now it's working. Okay, we are going to do it then. We are going to give it a shot here. So again, very, very simple Ruby app. This is a blog application that's created. If I go into my Elastic Beanstalk here, as a matter of fact, I need to switch into a new one. Jan, can you help me log into that one real quick? I don't know what the... What's the go ahead. Thanks. Okay. So we see we've got this Ruby application. I've already deployed it into AWS. And again, just very, very simple application. But it is basically it's a Ruby application that we've put into a Docker image, so we can control all the runtime behind it. We can control all the configurations, and we then want to deploy that container into a fully managed environment within Elastic Beanstalk, and that's what we've done. And Beanstalk can run single container instances. It can also run multi-container instances. So this is just a single container instance that's up and running. And if I go in, this is connected into Jenkins. You're going to have to help me log in with the Jenkins as well. We had all this up until the AV reset us here. But let's say we want to go in and just basically change something very simple, the title. Jenkins DevOps 2018. We're going to save that, and because we've got it in our Git, we're going to go ahead and commit that. And we'll go ahead and push that to our repo. Oh, cleared that as well. Let's just go ahead and... Oh. Yeah, I don't have it. We got security going on here, so he's going to type that in. We didn't have SSH set up on our Git repo, so we were still using our ID and password. Yes, question. 1 minute.
So how do you connect using the AWS CodeBuild? How you're connecting your on-prem environment to AWS? What are you using?
Well, in this case, right? This case, we don't have to do that connection. What I'm doing is I'm gonna push my update into my GitHub repo, which then is being basically monitored through my Jenkins pipeline. And so once that change is recognized in my source code, in my GitHub repo, Jenkins is going to pick that up. It's going to pick up all the appropriate files, the build spec, and then it's going to hand that off to CodeDeploy or CodeBuild. Yep, and then CodeBuild is going to go ahead and repackage and build a Docker image to that based on my build spec file, put it in the container registry, and then publish an update to Beanstalk.
But you still need the secret access key and access key to make that connection.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to set up the right permissions. You've got to set up the right access keys to be able to enable that integration to happen, and it's all controlled through IAM. So it's all very standard roles and policies behind it.
So within the code build, when you're configuring, probably you would have to give those keys.
Yeah, well, and in fact, when you integrate, like when you enable the plugin, the CodeBuild plugin within Jenkins, that's where you'll provide those credential sets.
One more question.
Yes.
So you mentioned something about EB extensions.
Yes.
So EB extensions comes into the picture when you restart the application server.
Or you do a new deployment. And really, EB extensions, think of those. The question is around the use of EB extensions.
So my question is, do you have any other extension, like EB extension, that would allow you to configure the environment before the application server restarts? So everything happens after the restart, but I have a use case where I have to configure some of the directories
Sure.
within the EC2 instance
Yep.
before the restart.
Yeah, let's take that use case specifically off. But yes, definitely, there's some ways, some very unique ways that you can actually use EB extensions. But yeah, let's take that offline here. I think the other session's coming in. Do we? All right, so that's okay. I'll just show you that it worked. That's all. Did you push it by chance? No? Oh, that's all right. It works, trust us. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.